Hello, my name is Emily Penman. I am the MajorTim.space Young Ambassador for 13 to 14-year-olds for 21 to 22.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm Myle. I'm the youngest ambassador for MajorTim.space. I'm 8 years old. Oh, I'm nearly 9. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
To meet you both.
So
And
you're
today
obviously keen in space, and you've got some questions to ask us, yeah?
Yeah. And today
Yeah.
we will be interviewing Anne and Chris from the MicroAge project, which is. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Yep. So I'm Anne McArdle. I'm a professor at the University of Liverpool, and my role is as a physiologist or a biologist, biochemist on the project. So I'm really interested in the muscle design, the muscle constructs that we're going to be sending up to the space station.
Okay, I'm Dr. Chris McArdle. I'm a consultant to this particular project. My background is in microelectronics and software, so I've been looking at some of the miniaturization and control systems that we use for the experiment.
Okay, my first question for you is pretty much what kind of things do you expect could happen to the muscles when they are in space?
So we're really interested at Liverpool in lots of different reasons that our muscles waste and they get smaller, they get weaker. We're particularly interested in what happens when old people, when people get to about 70, 80 years old. And you'll notice if you think of your grandparents or older people, family members, that their muscles have wasted and they find it harder than you do to jump around and whatever, So, but more importantly, to walk and to be able to get out of a chair, make a cup of tea and so on. So we're really interested in trying to help old people to maintain their muscle strength. So in space, what we expect to happen is a similar thing. So you'll know that when the astronauts come off the space station, they find it difficult to walk. Their muscles really wasted. And so we're hoping that what we learn about muscles in space will be relevant to what happens when people lose muscle as they get older. And so it'll help us to optimize, to build treatments for not only for astronauts, but for old people as well.
Myle, would you like to ask the next question?
Okay. Can you okay, will your experiments last?
How long do they last?
Yeah, how long will they last?
The experiment.
So the experiment goes up hopefully on Tuesday, and it takes about a day to get there. And then it immediately is put into one of the incubators by the astronauts onto the space station, and he or she will start the experiment just by flipping a switch, basically. And it'll run for about 24 hours. Then it comes out of the incubator and it goes into a freezer on the space station, and then we get the samples back down whenever the next return comes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that the experiments are sort of self-contained. The idea being that the astronauts don't have a lot of time to do the science for us. So we built intelligence into the experimental unit. So once the units are loaded and somebody presses go, it looks after itself and does all of its fluid changes and experimentation and results monitoring on its own.
Pretty smart.
Why did you make it so that it was quite an automatic process?
Well, as I said, the time available for the astronauts to do the work for us is very limited, and obviously they like to spread their time amongst a large number of as large a number of experiments as possible. So by making it self-contained, they can start our experiments and then go off and do something else. So their time is best used that way, and it's a relatively simple thing with microprocessors and electronics. to control the experiment, and because a lot of the things we're doing are things like electrical simulation, and that's quite simple stuff to do from relatively simple stuff to do from a microprocessor.
It's also to
My
do with
question-
astronaut safety as well. So if it's all contained in there, that's not going to interfere with the astronauts, which is our prime thing is to keep the astronauts safe.
Okay. Can
You
you
can go first.
please tell us what happens in your experiments?
Okay, so what we want to know is what happens to our muscles as they go into microgravity, just as if you were sitting down in just floating in microgravity. We also want to know what happens if you try and exercise in microgravity. So our muscles are going up. We're sending 72 little mini muscles that are about just less than a centimetre long and a few millimetres wide. And they're going up into microgravity. And are going to just sit there in microgravity, a bit like the astronauts floating around. But we're also you can make your muscles, like I'm moving my arm now, make your muscles contract and exercise. You can do that if you just pass a little electric current across the muscles, and they'll contract, they'll exercise. So we're going to look to see whether the muscles, if they're just sitting there, do they waste away quickly? Or also what the effect of if we exercise on the space station or in microgravity, what those effects are, and does it do the same as in the space station as old people when they exercise, which is what happens to old people is that they can't really build their muscles very well. They can do it a little bit, so we're hoping that it'll be the same. There'll be a really good model for old age.
Will we try and
any of the background information on the project or manage to download the app. But it's probably worth saying that the muscles that are being used in this experiment have all been grown down in the labs here. So they are tiny little pieces of muscle that are grown across these experimental units, so as we can then experiment on them. But we've been growing them for the last few weeks.
Okay. Will we try and find a mean for your experiment, or will you just put up with the first result?
Do you mean a mean in terms of doing it again? Yeah. So repeat, like statistical
Yes,
mean.
basically.
Yeah. Okay. So we're sending up 72 muscle constructs, and each one of those is a group of 6 that are replicates. Really, they're repeated. That they do the same thing. And so we've got 6 muscles that are just sitting there in space. They're not going to be contracted. The same thing is going to happen to them. And so it might be that we see a bit of muscle wasting, some of them getting smaller, but some more than others. And we will take the mean data for that. So that's how science works, as I'm sure you know. We need to make sure that the science is powerful enough to be able to come to a good conclusion. And that's why we send up multiple muscles, and that's been a real advantage for what we're doing now. People have normally biopsied astronauts, and there are only so many astronauts they can biopsy as well, take a muscle biopsy from.
Okay, my question is, will you specifically be sending human muscles, or will they be from another animal? I know that you've grown the muscle samples, but what kind of species are they from?
So they're human. What we've used is we've taken I think I said earlier, if you damage your muscle, you've got stem cells that sit within your muscle. So if I damage my muscle in my arm, the stem cells detect that, and they move in and they repair your muscle. They grow new muscle. So what we've done, and a team in France who've given us these cells they've taken a muscle biopsy which has contained those stem cells, and we've grown them in culture. So we've almost grown those up to be a muscle, but they come from a human biopsy.
Are all of the samples from the same human, from the same person?
These ones are, yes. We're hoping to do some studies where we'll send cells up from different humans of different ages.
Did you have to have a kind of process where you received volunteers for people, or a volunteer, and what were kind of I can't think of the word, but like the
Ethics, you mean? Yeah.
no, you know, like the specifics of like, did you have any like features in mind for this person? Like, did they have to be like healthy and of a certain age and that?
So we didn't make these cells; we just got them given to us. So, but the group that makes them, then they took the biopsy from a healthy young person. So that's what we want to look first of all at: what happens to muscle from healthy young people. We can start to look at different ages, whether it's the boy or girl, whether they smoke has any effect, or if they don't exercise very well, or if they eat a poor diet. We can do that later on. We just wanted to get some cells from a healthy person in the first instance.
Okay.
How long have you spent preparing for this mission?
Oh wow. That's a really good question. So just for this mission, in terms of from when we started and decided we wanted to send mussels into space, it's been about 4 years. But as scientists, to be able to put us in that position to be able to do that work, my career has been going for about 35 years, and Chris a little bit longer. So it's to build up the knowledge to be able to put the experiment together is a long time as well. So you need the experts in there who can do that. But about 4 years for the project itself.
Okay. I have a question for you.
Okay.
Can you tell us how did scientists first realize that microgravity affects muscle cells?
I guess it was just astronauts returning to Earth from gravity that they knew that there was a problem. Really, they couldn't walk very well. They're quite ill. It doesn't just affect muscles, as I'm sure you know. It affects their eyesight and lots of other things. So yeah, we realised quite early on that astronauts came back and they were weak and really needed some physiotherapy to get back to the strength that they had before they went.
Okay. My question is how long would it take for the muscle cells to reach the space station, and also how do you preserve them whilst they're going up there?
Again, a really good question. It depends when the rocket goes up. It depends really where the International Space Station is and when the rocket gets there. So it ends up chasing the station. But if it's a long distance away, it'll take a bit longer to get there. But if they're close by, it'll be quicker. We've allowed for 24 hours for it to get there. I think so. It's the next day anyway that it gets there. So to preserve, again, it's a really good question, because it's just like a piece of meat, really. You wouldn't leave that out on a counter, would you? So we've had to work to drop the temperature but keep them alive. So we can't freeze them; that would kill the muscle cells. So what we just wanted to slow down their metabolism. So we've done a lot of studies, or the lab team have, and we now know that they can survive. Well, they're happiest at 37 at body temperature, but we know that they'll survive at 27 degrees, and that'll make them live a little bit longer. So we've dropped them down to 27 degrees while they're going up to the space station, and then they'll be returned to 37 degrees.
Okay. How long does it take to astronauts get accustomed to the gravity of Earth once they've been back from space?
To the gravity of Earth, I think it's a little while. It's a few weeks, isn't it? So I'm not sure. You might be able to answer that question better than me.
Ask an astronaut.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been to space, so.
You'd like to, I'm sure. Yeah, I think if I was to hazard a guess, I would say weeks or maybe longer, actually, depending on what you mean by recovery. So recovering their muscles, if you've got some weakness but it's a healthy person, it normally takes about 4 or 5 weeks to get that muscle back.
Okay.
So with the incubator, is it being sent up with the muscles like separately?
No, the incubator's already on the space station, so the muscles are going up just in a little box, and they're taken out and slotted into the incubator.
We're sending up 24 of these little experimental units, each containing a muscle sample, and all of the necessary chemicals and fluids to keep them healthy. And then they are then slotted into the incubator, and they pick up the power and that sort of thing from the incubator. So yeah, they're separate units.
All about the size of a pack of cards.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that we've done similar experiments down on the ground, and the equipment you need to do it is about the size of an office desk. But obviously we couldn't send up a lot of that sort of thing to the space station, so the job for the engineers was to make it all smaller. And these experimental units that do these things are now about the size of a pack of playing cards. So we've managed to miniaturize things quite a lot.
Is there any kind of special features of the incubator that are specific to this experiment?
Not to the incubator, but to the boxes. We've had, well, yeah, that's true. We've had to be able to make the muscle contract with, so the ability to stimulate to contract, to put a little electric current across the muscle was unique. In the center of the incubator, there's a centrifuge, and so as a control experiment, we've got 1G. So some of the cells will be centrifuged to 1G, so it's a proper control experiment which mimics what happens on Earth.
Myle, you can ask the next question.
Okay. How much exercise do astronauts do each day?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. As much as they can. I mean, their time is very limited, but obviously their health is priority. So they do have access to resistance type exercise that they can do, but I don't know the final figures for what they do. No, I don't know.
I've heard that they use like really strong elastic to like stick themselves to treadmills and stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because they just float off the treadmill, wouldn't they? Yeah, they do. So the best sort of exercise, and for old people actually, is resistance exercise. So lifting weights, or those bands that you can get, the exercise bands that you can use.
My mum
has by far. You've got good. By far the best way to exercise, and that's what they try and do. But it's not ideal. They still lose muscle.
Yeah, but it slows it down, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
What will be your final preparations before launch?
Going on at the moment.
Yeah, that's today, and so that's the integration day. So the team downstairs are just preparing the muscle constructs to seal them into the units, and then hand them over to our integration team, KUBIK, and they will then hand them to NASA. So today, and then they just wait with NASA for 2 days before they go onto the rocket on Tuesday.
Another question is, basically with like bacteria that could be on the muscle cells, how have you been able to like prevent rotting without killing the muscle cells?
Again, a really good question. You're clearly a scientist, I think. So when we grow cells, we need to because of course you're putting muscle cells into food stores at the right temperature. It's wet and everything. It's ideal for growing any cells. So the muscles are treated with antifungal, antibiotics is all in the liquid really that they get. So the chances of anything, even if it gets in there, growing are really slim. But the scientists work in a clean environment, in a what we call a hood, tissue culture hood. They're gloved up and they protect the cells. And the cells have all been checked for known viruses as well, so they're not going to be virally infected either.
Why do muscles get weaker when we get older?
Very good question, and we don't know. That's what we want to try and find out. We lose. So you've got that. My arm muscle here is made up of thousands of long muscle cells, and as we get older, they don't just get smaller. We lose them completely, and we really don't know why that happens. But it happens over decades, over 10, 20, 30 years. What we want to learn from the space station, we think, so astronauts can lose almost as much muscle over days or weeks. And so it really provides us with if that works, if we can work out why astronauts are losing their muscle that quickly, it'll help us treat older people But because it's really hard to study muscle loss in older people, because you'd have to study them for 20 years. But we can study astronauts over a few weeks, or cells in microgravity over a few weeks.
What I'm guessing is just the fibers in the muscles just get really worn out, and that's probably why my granny just gets muscle pains all the time.
Yeah, they do get worn out, but if you can take muscle out of like say we take a little bit of muscle out of your granny and we put it in our cell culture system, it'll behave like a young muscle. So there's nothing inherently wrong with your granny's muscle fibers themselves. It's the fact that she's lost a lot of them already. So we can't get those back once they're gone. We need to understand why they just disappear. And the ones that are left, we can make them bigger. So your granny, if she does some of those little weight exercises like the astronauts do with the exercise bands, or picking up when she's carrying her shopping, lifting it up and down a bit, that will help. But you have to be really careful that you don't fall over as well when you're older, because if you trip, you won't fall over. But if you trip when you've got no muscle, it's really hard, you'll fall over.
Yeah.
I have a question. So at what age do you think that the muscles stop growing and actually start kind of regressing and becoming smaller?
So they start to waste when we reach about 55, 60, something like that. It's not every individual person's different, but around about 55, 60. And if you can get them as big as you can at that point, then you're in a better situation. So someone who undertakes lifelong exercise will have bigger muscles than someone who doesn't, but they'll still lose muscle at the same rate. They just end up with bigger muscles anyway. It takes them longer to get to that point of the old lady who's sitting in a chair, who can't get up and can't pick up a cup of tea.
How long will we spend researching the cells when they get back to Earth?
We've got a lot of analysis set up ready to do as soon as we get the muscles back. So they'll come back to the Kennedy, and then they get sent over to us, shipped over to us. As soon as they get back, we're going to mush up the muscles and look at their protein content and what's changed to see if they look like muscles from old people. And then we're going to look at the fluid that the muscles have been in as well, to see if they've released any nasty chemicals that we do see released from muscles of older people as well. It's called cytokines. So if they're if they've changed from looking to being very healthy to see what their profiles are like, if they look more like a sick muscle, basically. And it'll take probably about 6 months, I think.
My question is, are you doing the same experiments on Earth so that you can compare? And also, is there any differences or like any kind of changes to the incubators, how you said they were bigger? Like what kind of changes are physically different with the equipment that you are using on Earth if you are repeating the experiments on Earth?
We are repeating the experiments on Earth. And in the run-up to coming here, we also did a full run-through and sent muscles over to Switzerland to go through, where they have the same incubator and so on. And so we have had samples already back to the labs that have been through the same process, but on Earth. And then we will be repeating it again. The reason we send the other cells up, the control cells up, as we call it, and that's exactly what you're talking about, it's the control. The reason we send those up to the space station is that they've been through all of the vibrations, the temperature differences, the radiation that they get exposed to, and so on. And the only difference for those is that they go in the centrifuge and they mimic 1G. They mimic exactly what would be happening on Earth, and they've been exposed to everything else, but there's microgravity. So there's your control.
Okay. Oh wait, I also have one more question. I know you mentioned centrifuges and that, but on Earth is what are the technological differences on Earth from what you have in the space station?
We could just repeat everything we do on the space station. Of course, you wouldn't have the the radiation. We could control for that if we wanted to, the vibrations and everything. But we actually wouldn't choose to do an experiment in the same way with the same space constraints. We haven't got those space constraints in the lab. So and that goes back to, you know, when we'd normally do this experiment, it would be use equipment the size of a desk. And we would have bigger muscles as well that we'd study, because that would give us more, we could do more analyses and so on. So we're limited with what's going up to the space station with what we can measure on it. So there are some limitations that we would not necessarily have on Earth.
Okay. Has the University of Liverpool been involved in any other space missions before this, or is this the first one?
This is the first biology mission, I think. The leader of the mission has just come in behind us, actually, Professor Malcolm Jackson. This is one question, is Malcolm, is this the first university study on the space station?
First University of Liverpool.
University of Liverpool on the space station. Yeah, so it is the first one. We do have people who work on satellites and things like that within the university, but it's the first one to the space station.
Are they students or professors?
We have students through to professors on our team. We have had students who are doing their undergraduate degree, both in engineering and in the biology, life sciences, so physiology, biology, right the way through to every level of career in science really involved in our project.
But I've been working on space technology for a number of years now, so that was one of the things I brought to the project, the experience of what you need to do with electronics and technology to make it suitable for space.
So the whole host of different careers that you can get in. A whole range of different careers that are needed to get the mission up to space.
I was wondering, for the incubator that they have in the space station, did you help design that, Chris?
No, that's been up there for some time now. So that pre-existed my involvement in this project. But what we had to look at was how we could make the stuff that we wanted to go into it suitable to integrate with that, still get the information that we needed. Which is why, you know, these individual experimental units are capable of recording their own data.
Okay. Will your research also benefit astronauts on missions who are experiencing muscle loss in space?
So the plan is that we'll be able to help old people and astronauts. If they both lose their muscle in the same way, then we'll be able to develop treatments that will help both of them, both astronauts and older people.
Nice.
Okay, this is a bit of a, like, not unrelated, but like less focused on like muscle, kind of the muscle wasted. But basically, with the actually getting the muscles to NASA and and like onto the rocket, like how have you had to like pay a fee for them to be sent up there, and like what kind of process have you had with actually communicating with NASA for the experiment to go ahead?
Because we're in the UK, it's a very complicated process. Do you want to go first?
Well, there are a number of agencies involved. The UK Space Agency is actually funding this experiment in its entirety. But there are lots of sort of international cooperations that go on, and so there's a whole chain of command, if you like, that you have to get involved with to pass necessary tests to pass it on to the next person. Because as you might imagine, there are very strict specifications as to what you're allowed to put into space. And so at every stage in the design and development of the experiment, we have to go through a series of tests to make sure the thing is electrically safe, biologically safe. It's not going to suffer from vibration problems or radiation problems or any of the other things that can happen in a space flight. But then there are some very, very strict protocols that you have to pass through to make that happen.
With like actually protecting the cells from radiation as they are in the rocket going up to the station, like, how did you find ways to like protect them so that they didn't get damaged?
They're shielded containers, so you can't completely protect from it. That's one of the problems with spaceflight, but you can shield the containers as well as you can.
How do you shield them?
It's mainly just physical shielding.
Oh.
Metal casing. Yeah.
When will they return to Earth? When will the missile souls return to Earth?
We're hoping that they'll come down fairly quickly. But we don't know. It's dependent on what space they have on the cargo. But ideally, in about 6 weeks. But it depends.
Once the experiments are finished, they'll go into a cryogenic freezer up on the space station. So there's no great rush to bring them down, other than the fact that we really want to get hold of it, and with no result. But yeah, we're hoping it'll come down fairly quickly.
As you said, with the cells having to go through many hands to actually get to NASA, how did you actually what process did it actually take to send the samples to NASA for it to go up on Earth? And how did you store them whilst they were being posted?
You're right. We had to send them with a courier, which you can send frozen samples, obviously, with a courier, or you could send them live if you chose to. But we chose to send with the mussels. You can freeze them when they're in as a single cell. So we sent some over as a single cell, and then the team had to come over and grow them here and turn them into mature long mussel fibers, which has taken about 5 or 6 weeks. The process of shipping them over was basically just to get a FedEx type company to deliver them to.
The first time that the cells will go out of the hands of our scientists will be later this evening, and by that time they will have been enclosed inside the experimental unit, so that they're not susceptible to a lot of problem then, other than perhaps temperature. And then we'll hand them over, and they'll then go in that state into cool bags and be loaded up onto SpaceX 24 for flight.
Nice. I had another one. I keep thinking of more questions, and then I keep forgetting them. How can people follow the progress of the mission with the app?
What happened with the app? The app is available both for Apple and Android, so it's working with most Androids. If you look on the apps, it's free as well. If you look on the App Store or the equivalent Google Store, then you can just download it. It's called MicroAge Mission. You should find it fairly easily. And it's got the mission patch design on the front, so you should be able to find it. It's got Ask a Scientist potential. You can ask questions there. So if there are any any questions that you've forgotten to ask today, you can ask on that. And it's got an update that will feed through from Twitter, so you'll see the updates appearing on the app as we load them onto Twitter.
I have one more question. Basically, with COVID, has any of the preparation for this experiment and project had to be done online? Or not in person?
Yeah, we couldn't. Yeah, so we had when we tested the full run through, the sort of mock run through of the process. Really, the scientists should have been there in Switzerland. So that was a little bit different. They couldn't run through the process as it should have been. So there was because travel was limited. I know the time for the scientists in the lab working up to it was limited as well. We couldn't go into the lab for 6 months or so. So it was tough, and the team have worked really hard to get back on track.
Thank you for coming here today to answer our questions. It's been very interesting. I've really enjoyed listening to both of you. We're looking forward.
Yeah.
Pardon?
It's been a really interesting set of questions. It's been great fun answering them.
Oh, thank you. We're looking forward to seeing your experiment go to the ISS, and also to see our patch travel up. Obviously.
Good luck. Good luck with your mission.
Thank you.